In Washington, the debate rages over U.S. policy toward Cuba and over the future of the Cuban refugees. For months, John Quinones has been with people making a desperate decision to flee, and with those who are rescuing them.
Early morning over the Florida Straits, and a group of volunteer pilots is combing the vast Caribbean, searching for Cuban rafters.
We have rafters. We have rafters. And you see them now.
Just off the right wing, a tiny speck of life bobbing in the turbulent sea.
Do you have the raft inside?
Yeah, behind your wing.
The pilots, known as Brothers to the Rescue, drop food and water.
1, 2, 3.
They radio the U.S. Coast Guard for help.
Brothers to the rescue, this is Coast Guard Cars.
Within 3.5 hours, the Cuban rafters, 6 men, a woman, and her young daughter, are rescued.
We're here to save lives. We're here in the quest to save the lives of those who are trying to attain freedom. Briefing time!
Jose Basulto is the founder of Brothers to the Rescue and a vehement opponent of Fidel Castro. 33 years ago, this Cuban-American fought against the Castro regime in the Bay of Pigs invasion and wound up abandoned at sea.
I know the feeling of being stranded there in the ocean when you don't know who's going to come get you and if you're going to be ever found. Fortunately, I was picked up and I made it.
Today, Basulto and 24 other pilots are returning the favor with an operation funded entirely by donations.
Got 75.
Airborne.
Every week, they fly thousands of miles, scanning the waters between Florida and Cuba, looking for refugees.
They're coming out of desperation. It's a feeling of suffocation that the Cuban people feel. And sometimes they just can't take it anymore. And they'd rather die in the Strait of Florida in a quick death than keep living under Castro.
This is where the voyage begins. The northern shores of Cuba. For the last several days, in a town called Cojimar, hundreds of people have been rushing down these streets, a lifelong dream loaded on their shoulders. I'm leaving everyone behind, he says, my son, my wife, my parents. When Fidel Castro announced he would no longer stop Cubans in small boats from fleeing the island, a cottage industry and rafts shifted into high gear. Visit any backyard in this coastal town and you'll find men hurriedly tying together inner tubes and styrofoam with canvas and string. It's the only means of escape from the poverty and repression of today's Cuba. The depth of that misery is obvious throughout the island. We travel down provincial back roads where entire neighborhoods are pleading for passage out of their homeland.
How many of you would go to the U.S. given the opportunity? ¿Cuántos de ustedes irían si les daran la oportunidad?
You don't have to look far to understand the desperation. These are the shelves of government grocery stores. Not only is there no meat, but often no rice, no beans, no milk, no medicine. This is a land where children often subsist on a diet of sugared water and stale bread. The reason? The collapse of Cuba's benefactor, the Soviet Union, and the choking effect of the U.S. embargo on the island, now in its 32nd year. Today, the average Cuban earns only about $2 a month. That means he has to work a year to buy just one of these inner tubes.
It's hell. It's a living hell.
Marcia Morgado is a Cuban poet now living in Miami. She fled the island as a child and has devoted much of her life to the study of the Cuban boat people.
Your life in Cuba is consumed with barely surviving. You may be in trouble for thinking wrong thoughts. Wrong thoughts. How can anyone live under such circumstances? This is what forces men and women to throw themselves at the mercy of the sea.
27-year-old Chino is leaving behind his wife and unborn child.
This is very dangerous. Es peligroso.
Más peligroso.
What's even more dangerous is the hunger we suffer here.
Across the street from Chino's home, I meet 6-year-old Doki. Come with me, he says, and I'll show you the preparations we're making. Sure enough, after a short walk, we find his family in a frantic rush to finish their raft for a midnight run toward the U.S. The trip will take anywhere from 2 days to a week, maybe longer. Yet these men can't afford any food. They will carry just sugared water.
Only water with sugar. Nada más esto.
Anything that even appears seaworthy is as good as gold here. Watch what happens when this young swimmer tries to climb on board this raft. He's turned away. And then there's the 20-foot boat on the back of this truck, headed for the shore. It's chased through the village streets by a mob desperate to get on board. When the boat's owners finally lose the crowd and hide under a bridge, we notice that among the passengers is Emmanuel, a 7-month-old baby boy. Later, under the cover of darkness, the boat is lowered into the surging sea. We no longer see the baby, but we can hear him. What's in store for these rafters during their odyssey at sea? Well, this summer, we spent weeks in the Florida Straits, both by water and by air, with Brothers to the Rescue.
What's the visibility now? Very good. We got better than 10 miles.
This is the 90-mile-wide passageway that poet Marcia Morgado calls a kind of Berlin Wall.
Very tough wall, very tough. There's a possibility of freedom, but there's a probability of death. None of us know the sea very well. It can change from total calmness to turbulence, and you're there on a raft lost.
Our first day in the Florida Straits, and we spot our first raft. 8 Cubans on board, out of food and drinking water. They've been drifting for 4 days, and yet they've traveled only 25 miles north of Cuba. Like so many rafters, they've been carried off course by storms and the strong currents of the Gulf Stream, which pushes them east instead of north.
The waves were as high as 15 feet, the winds 40 to 50 miles per hour. We were staring in the face of death.
I hugged my daughter tightly and I kissed her. I thought we were going to die.
I held on to my mother real tight and I told her not to cry because I'd get scared and start crying too.
Day 2. We come upon a shipwreck in the Bahamas, 70 miles east of Miami. 7 men stranded on a jagged piece of rock known as Dead Man's Cay. From afar, we see them waving, their arms flailing in the air like children begging for an embrace. As soon as they're spotted, Brothers to the Rescue starts dropping supplies.
Coming in for drop.
Usually the first thing we drop to them is a small radio that we can use to communicate with them, find out how many days they have been at sea.
Balcero, a ver si me escucha.
It's the rafters' lucky day. Although Basulto and his team can't legally pick up any refugees, they radio the Coast Guard. Minutes later, the rafters are rescued. We get closer and see their faces, glowing with relief. Day 3 in the Florida Straits. Just 10 miles from Dead Man's Cay, we find another shipwreck. This time, 10 Cubans clinging to life on a piece of coral reef. As we climb toward them, we learn they've been stranded here for 9 days.
When we first landed here, we were very sad. We didn't know where we were, and we had very little water left.
How much water?
A liter.
Okay, we're coming in to drop water. Coming in to drop water.
That drink of water may make the difference between life and death to them.
Stop!
But not all the rafters are so fortunate. It's estimated that 1 out of every 4 perishes at sea, the victims of both physical and mental exhaustion.
What happens is that they start hallucinating. They start losing grasp of reality, and suddenly they feel that their mothers are calling out to them. And then they walk as if the sea turned to soil, and they walk towards their mother's embrace, and they drown.
Day 4, we arrive at Quai Sal, an inviting strip of land that's well known to thousands of rafters. Often, the people who wash up on these shores mistakenly believe they've landed in America. But quickly they discover this is nothing more than a deserted island, 65 miles south of Florida. For the poorly equipped Cuban rafters, it might as well be 1,000 miles from their destination. Quai Sal is littered with the remnants of makeshift boats that never made it to the U.S. The island is also littered with the remains of a Brothers to the Rescue plane. Jose Basulto crash-landed here while trying to deliver food to some rafters. Day 5, we see a tiny gray spot on the horizon. As we get closer, we realize it's yet another group of Cubans floating aimlessly.
What's that?
The crude motor on their makeshift boat is broken. We call for help.
Raft with 13 people on board.
The Coast Guard is overwhelmed with rafters, so they give us special permission to rescue them ourselves. As we approach, 3 generations of a Cuban family, lost at sea for 2 days, are overcome with emotion.
We gambled with death. We don't know how to repay you.
The rafters are transported to Florida and reunited with their families. Like Evangelio Fernandez, he has not seen his brother Alfredo in 14 years. But this was among the last of the reunions. Under the new Clinton policy, the rafters will still be rescued by the Coast Guard, but only to be transferred to detention camps. What do you think of the policy?
I think that if the policy is a comprehensive policy that brings down the Castro government, it makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, it's just a slap in the face to the Cuban people.
What if the United States doesn't let you in?
We'll find a way. How? I don't know. But we'll find a way to get to the United States.
She'll have lots of company. This was the scene when we started work on our story a couple of months ago. But take a look at the Florida Straits today.
How long will they continue to come?
So long as Cuba remains hell, it will continue to happen. People will find a way of escaping a circumstance which robs them of their dignity as human beings. They will find a way. Rafts is our way.
And just today, despite warnings of an approaching storm in the Florida Straits, the Coast Guard picked up nearly 1,000 Cuban refugees by mid-afternoon.